Well, here's my suggestion. I suggest that we think of love as having two dimensions, not just one, but two dimensions. One dimension is that on which the agapists had their eye, the dimension of seeking the good to advance the good of the other, the well-being, the flourishing. They called it, it's fair to call it, benevolence. That's one dimension, clearly. To treat the neighbor with love is to seek to enhance the well-being of the neighbor. But I suggest that there's another dimension, and this other dimension is that of showing due respect for the worth of the other. And that's the justice dimension, you see? Seeking to enhance the well-being, but showing due respect for the worth of the other. And the point is that you can seek to advance the good of a person while paying no respect whatsoever to the worth of the person or other person. That's what's wrong with paternalistic benevolence. The benevolent paternalist cares about advancing the good of the other person. He has no respect whatsoever for respect for the other person. That's what I first saw when I first went to South Africa, 1976. At the conference there were Dutch present, and for the first day and a half the Dutch and the Afrikaners got into hot, heated arguments with each other about apartheid. Then neither the Dutch nor the Afrikaners had anything left to say to each other that was new, so they began to shut up. And then the so-called blacks and the coloreds from South Africa began to speak up. They spoke up to my ear more in tones of hurt than anger, though I would want to let them say what the emotion actually was. But contrasted with the hot anger of the Dutch, it sounded more like hurt than anger. And they cried out for justice. They called it justice. And they described all the episodes in which they were, many of the episodes in which they were demeaned. Daily episodes of being demeaned. And I was astonished at the response of the Afrikaners. The response of the Afrikaners was not to argue with the blacks and the coloreds and to say, when you thought you were being demeaned or being treated unjustly, you were not in fact being demeaned or treated unjustly. That's not what the Afrikaners said. What they said is, justice is not a relevant category. Benevolence is the relevant category. Then they went into recitations of benevolence, of how benevolent they were towards the blacks and the coloreds. They recited instances in which they gave to the blacks living in their backyards Christmas trinkets, second-hand clothing from their children that their children had outworn, and so forth. And they described the whole system of apartheid itself as a strategy of benevolence. Here's how. In South Africa, you have something like 11 different nations, 11 different cultural groupings, 11, 10, a little bit ambiguous as to whether we call the Anglos and the Afrikaners one people or two. But, and the aim of apartheid was this, to allow force each cultural entity, socio-cultural entity, to find its own identity, to flourish in its own way, with its own language, its own literature, and all of that. But if you're going to do that, you've got to pull them apart. You can't have them all mixed up with each other, right? Apartheid. So apartheid was aimed at the great benevolent, had the great benevolent goal in mind of allowing each nation to flourish in its own unique, culturally distinctive way. I came away persuaded that I had seen benevolence being used as an instrument of oppression. I don't particularly doubt that the Afrikaners saw themselves as being benevolent. Some people were very cynical. I think that by and large they did give trinkets to the blacks in their backyards. I think by and large they did give second-hand clothing to them. I think that this is how they did think of apartheid, but it was oppression. Paternalistic oppression. So that's why we need both dimensions, seeking to advance the good of the other, but also paying due respect for the worth of the other. Next question. Do we have an English word for this kind of love, this two-dimensional sort of love? Do we have an English word for it? This love, which both seeks to advance the well-being of the other and seeks to honor the worth and the dignity of the other. And I think we do. I think it's the word care. In a sense, not of caring for, like a patient, but of caring about somebody. Think about that. When you genuinely care about somebody, you seek to advance their good, their well-being, right? But you also care about, you're also concerned that they be treated with due dignity. If somebody demeans them, or if you demean them, but if you see somebody else demeaning them, you get angry. You get angry both if somebody just causes them needless pain and suffering, and if you see somebody else demeaning them. So care. I think we should understand love as care. Nygren and Niebuhr both thought that love may be fine and noble in all respects, while in this world of ours perpetrating injustice. Here's my suggestion. I suggest that if benevolence perpetrates injustice, it is malformed love. Malformed care. It exhibits one dimension of authentic care, but lacks the other dimension of authentic care. So when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, I think he was not enjoining us to treat the neighbor with justice-blind benevolence. He was enjoining us to care about the neighbor. It may be only in that minimal way that I can care about my enemy. I may not be in a position to advance his well-being very much. But I never have to and I never must wrong him or her. Always that dimension of love is relevant. So let me move towards the conclusion. I've been assuming all the way through here that human beings do all have worth. Right? Let's face it, some human beings are despicable. They spread pain and suffering all about them. They demean their fellow human beings, treat them like dirt. The papers have recently been full of stories about the man in Cleveland who was convicted and imprisoned some years back for rape, then after 15 years released, and who, after his release, killed at least 11 women and buried them in various places around his house. This is an enemy, if ever there was one. And our natural impulse is to feel nothing but anger towards him, seething anger, vengeance. But then comes Jesus and says, love him. What can this possibly mean? I suggest that what it means is that even if we subject him to the hard treatment of punishment as we should, we must not demean him. We must treat him in accord with his worth. Or if the person is a terrorist, captured and located in Guantanamo, perhaps despicable, who knows, will still be treated with worth. But somebody says, he's got no worth. He's nothing but scum, through and through scum. No, it's a scripture. You're wrong about that. He too bears the image of God. He can't get rid of that. Nothing he can do to get rid of that. And that gives him worth. And even to him, furthermore, God extends his offer of justification upon the presence of faith. You may think that faith is most unlikely. That also gives him worth. There's just nothing a human being can do to get rid of such worth. Everything I've said begs to be developed much further, but I trust my main point is clear. I think we have to reinterpret love and reinterpret justice, so that to love the neighbor is not to do something other than treat him as justice requires, but that to love him incorporates treating him as justice requires. And what Jesus meant by agape, I think, was not justice blind love, but care. Thanks.